Hello. Hi, my darlings. It's me, Amber. Good evening. Good evening, everyone. And we have yet another Wednesday. And with that, of course, comes another one of our favorite story reading streams where we all just sit down and get nice and cozy, hopefully with a nice hot cup of tea. Or if you have, maybe a nice hot chocolate with extra whipped cream and marshmallows. That could be very nice. Or I especially hope that a lot of you are able to snuggle up in a nice warm blanket or lay down in your comfortable bed or maybe take a nap on the couch. Or perhaps you're here to fall asleep to my voice as it's reading another set of fairy tales to you. You got nom noms? That's very nice, Moogie. But yes, welcome in everyone in chat. Oh, my darlings. Dice, sweetheart. I see you were already here. And Bard, my most precious. And of course, Moogie. I'm so happy to have you here. And big shout out to Bard, who raided in before I even had the chance to really start. I really do appreciate it, darling. I hope you've had a very lovely stream trying out Steam demos. Yeah, that's one of the things that's happening out there in the real world, isn't it? Well, the real world, or maybe the Steam world. A whole bunch of game demos are out. And one of them, also recommended to me by Bard, I might consider playing next week for Valentine's Day. It is a very particular brand of dating sim. Maybe a bit on the obscure side. But I don't really have any plans yet. I don't think I'm going to stream on the actual Tuesday. I think I'll just do my usual Wednesday stream. Because I do like to take a break between streaming days. And besides, you sweethearts will wait for me, won't you? Now, what else is new? Oh, we have a new channel points redeem. You can now give me your favorite soft mommy some head pats. Bard, thank you. Thank you for the head pat. Oh, that was so cute. I love it. It's adorable. Mookie. And one from you as well. Aren't you just the most sweetest darlings? I like them. I like them a lot. Just cute little head pats. Hi, LJ. Welcome in, welcome in. I hope you're having a comfortable evening. We're just chatting still. I'm mostly just happy to be here, enjoying the head pats from Bard and Moogie because I think it is such a cute little feature being able to redeem on screen interactions. I'm hoping that for next week I'll be able to have some more stuff. Do I brave? Oh, do I try to brave the mash today? That potato mash sounds like a final boss the more you tell me about it. It's like it lives downstairs in a container and it haunts your very existence. Jet, thank you for the hydrate redeem. I will certainly do that. Mm-mm. Oh, LJ, thank you for the head pat. Bro, I'm rebounding and all my food aversions go burr. Oh, Bard, goodness. I hope that you have something that's at least nice and wholesome and comforting, even if it's just a well done cup of tea. Thank you for the lurk, Jet. I hope that you will enjoy the comfortable time because tonight is really all about me reading. So let's actually head over to our reading stream screen. And there we are. Me and my table full of absolute cuties. LJ! Thank you for yet another head pat. You get 5 per stream. Because otherwise I would sit here and just have everyone patting me all the time. I wanted to see if it would move with you. No, it's just sort of overlaid on top of me. I mean, that's just that's just how it is. Only 5? Well, should there be more? Oh, like a move position? Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah. It's so uh I try to sort of center it on me in each scene as best as I could. The magic of OBS. Okay. So, my darlings, I hope everyone is gonna get nice and comfortable. Yeah. I'm gonna pin the usual message that we have up for the story time. Okay. Look at those kringly dinglies on the desk. Yeah, I really love my plush collection. Everyone's just looking so cute and so sweet and so squishable. Moogie, you're in there. Right next to Sam. I don't normally care about the head pat redeems, but with you it's definitely worth it. Aw, LJ. That's very sweet of you. I love the head pats. I love them so much. It's, first of all, my absolutely favorite emote. And then I can now get real head pats. Oh, you gotta love this stuff. The streamer life. Being all cozy and happy. You're very patable, Miss Pine. I am incredibly cute, yes. Just a sweet, soft mommy. Here to read my sweethearts a couple of lovely stories tonight. Okay, I am adjusting my glasses on my face, zooming in to the web page, the 200%, so that I can actually read what's on screen. And tonight, we are going to continue reading from the Swiss Fairy Tales book by William Elliot Griffis. And it looks like tonight we'll be able to get through the last 5 of the stories in this collection, which I think will be a very nice ending to this series of story reading streams. Before, of course, we either move on to something like a nice visual novel, or maybe I'll find another book of stories that I can read to you. I do quite like this format of short stories, little bite sized fairy tales to give to my darlings. So, everybody, get cozy. Make sure that you're having an enjoyable evening. And I think that I will get started on story number 20. This one's called The Alpine Hunter and His Fairy Guardian. And it goes something like this. There is one variety of the Swiss fairies who manage to get along with very few clothes, and those very thin. The prettiest ones among them seem to live up among the highest mountain peaks. There it is colder than anywhere else, but these fairies do not mind it. Furs are not in fashion, but only very filmy garments. On their backs are gauzy wings, by which they can fly around from one peak to another. They hover over the meadows also, which in summer glisten with blossoms of every tint and hue. They love to plague Jack Frost and the old mountain goats and the giants that have beards of icicles and hair of snow streamers, and who try so hard to freeze out the flowers. These fairies know all the secrets of the mountains. They find out where the largest and prettiest rock crystals are, and where the priceless minerals are to be found. They can tell just where the caves of sparkling topaz are situated, but they do not let any mortal know, unless he is their favorite. They can lead a hunter to the spot where the chamois are feeding on the moss. When they want to reward a brave man, they bring him bullets that are sure to hit the buck and win for the marksman a fine pair of horns. Or at the village shooting matches, plug the bull's eye of the target and so secure the prize. To please his fairy guardian, the hunter must always promise to do what she bids him, or else her bad temper is roused. Then she scolds and leaves him to his luck, which after that time is never good. It is not safe to quarrel with a fairy. Now there was one of these lovely creatures named Silver Wreath, because she looked as charming as the morning mists at sunrise, when shot through and through by the upspring light. Then they float off in the air like glistening wreaths made of golden braid, or like scarves of silver. Sometimes, when illuminated by the sun's rays, they remind one of the necklaces of pearls, or when many are together, like white garments of burnished silver set with costly gems. Silver Wreath, the fairy, was noted for living among the lofty peaks, where only the hardiest flowers, such as the alpine rose and the noble white flower called the edelweiss, could grow. No animal or bird, ermine or ptarmigan, could be whiter than her body, which glistened like snow crystals or hoarfrost when struck by the sunbeams. When she blushed, her whole body was like the wonderful alpine glow that after sunset robes the mountain tops, and both for the same reason. The sky became rosy red because the sun's rays are reflected from the snow even after going down. So this fairy's beautiful body not only shone by its own light, but at times reflected the great luminary's loveliest tints. It was a way the sun had of saying good night to the mounty mountains. So, also, Fairy Silver Wreath blushed when in the dawn of day she made her farewell curtsy to her companions, for after sunrise the fairies disappear. Now there was a brave hunter named Genod, or maybe Genod, who lived in the village of Uri. In his pursuit of the chamois, the stalwart youth was not afraid to follow this agile animal over the most dizzy precipices and far up beyond the snow line. He did not hesitate to climb the most perpendicular mountain walls to get a good shot. Hence, he was often compelled to spend a night amid the cliffs and glaciers. One evening, while on a hunting expedition, Genod caught sight of Silver Wreath as she was flitting on her gauzy wings around a peak. At once, he fell in love with her. Happily for him, she was, after several meetings, enamored by Genod, and he became her favorite. As they became better acquainted with each other, she guided him over unknown paths and often warned him of danger. She directed him to the chamois herds and fed him with the finest oatcake and cheese. When too wearied to retrace his way back or to return home for the night, she watched over him while he slept. There, far above, where the eagles flew, she guarded her lover from falling rock or ice, shielding him from every peril, seen and unseen. In that way, it happened that for many months the hunter was in luck and became the envy of his village companions. He never slipped or lost his balance, or fell over a precipice, or into an ice crevasse, or was hit by an avalanche, or lost his path. On every occasion he came back home with a fat buck on his shoulders, or a brace of ptarmigan birds, or a big rock crystal, and always looked rosy and healthy. All the young girls admired him, and the youth wanted to be like him. They hoped to learn the reason of his luck, which he kept a secret. Silver Wreath soon found out what Genod liked most to eat, for while she was a fairy, he was a mortal and had a stomach, and always a lively appetite. He was very particular and rather fussy about the kind of cheese he ate, and he always bought the best that could be found in the market. In fact, he would often walk many miles and spend his last coin to get a cheese of an especially good brand or flavor, no matter at what price. The fairy soon found this out about her lover's taste, and when Genod was hungry after climbing the steep rocks, she fed him on a most delicious kind of cheese. He declared no mortal man or woman could make any equal to it, whether in taste or in nourishment or in flavor. On the other hand, he amused her by singing, rattling off rhymes, or telling her stories about men and women. One of these, about Peter Peter Pumpkin Eater, seemed to her to be the funniest of all. After that, when he asked her what he might bring her for a present, he was surprised to hear her say, "A pumpkin shell." Then he laughed heartily. When he brought it to her, she kept the pumpkin shell in a rock crevice as a great curiosity and called it her doll house. Genod was so happy in his love for Fairy Silver Wreath that he wanted to make her his wife. So one day he kneeled before her and asked her to be his bride. He thought it would be easy for her to accept his love and care after she had so helped and favored him. But Silver Wreath, much as she loved Genod, did not welcome the idea of either changing her nature or leaving her mountain home. Either or both meant much to her, though little to him. She would have to put on women's clothes and be bothered with changes in fashion, with which fairies are not troubled. She would be shut up in a house among mortals who get old and die. She would have to depart from heaven-high peaks and things white and vast and glorious, and dwell among gossips and tale-bearers. Besides, she could not tell whether Janod would always be fond of her. One day, she remembered the story he had told her in fun of Peter Peter Pumpkin Eater, and it frightened her when she thought of Peter's wife. So she brooded long and hard over the matter as to whether she should say yes to Genod and be his wife. Would he be a Peter and keep her in a pumpkin shell? Yet the hunter was so handsome and so brave. Besides, he did so love the mountains and the alpine flowers. Every time he came to her, he had an alpine rose in his coat as a symbol of his joy, which might, however, be for his lifetime only, but in his hand he held an edelweiss, a symbol of faith in the things eternal. This showed that he thought of both the affairs of the body and the life of the soul in the true Swiss way. Besides, he so vehemently assured her that, whenever she should get homesick, he would take her with him up to her old haunts. Every time he went to hunt the chamois, she should be his companion. Last but not least, he pressed his suit so ardently that, finally, she consented to marry him and live in his home. But she gave her promise only on one condition. She would be a faithful and loving wife, and live truly as a mortal, provided he should agree to the rules which she made about eating, and if he would observe the table manners which she approved. Knowing his weakness for cheese, she vowed to keep the larder furnished always with the same kind of this delicacy upon which she had fed him in his hunting trips. "I'll wed with you," she said, "providing that every time, when you eat and enjoy the cheese, you will leave one small portion uneaten on your plate." This one condition of wifehood seemed so simple that he laughed out loud and poked fun at his betrothed at her being so childish. But she looked very grave, though she did not speak a word. Fairies are not fools, and it may be that even mortal women know more than men in some things. Besides, the pumpkin shell had become to her such a spectre that one day she smashed it with a rock, even after he had promised vehemently to obey her law as to the table manners. Then he gave her a kiss, and everything serious was forgotten in the mutual joy of lovers. So the fairy put on a human form, keeping her beauty and loveliness, but leaving off her wings and wearing bridal clothes. Then they were married in the village church. At the wedding, the maidens all marveled at her wonderful dress and veil of silvery gauze. When the honeymoon was past, all declared that no more modest, sensible, and pretty woman had ever come among them, while they wondered where Janod could have met and won so lovely and so good a wife. In her new home, the fairy lady seemed to be happy every hour. Days sped into weeks and months into years in the routine of household and village life. What with her flowers and her cuckoo clock and her carved wooden spoons and her well set table and a flower garden and vines on the house wall that surpassed all her neighbors, her beehives and dovecots, the home of Janod and Silver Wreath was a place of beauty and joy. She was at once the delight and envy of all the village brides and wives. The blossoming plants seemed to thrive and grow more beautiful because she loved them so. On her dainty, well spread table were set the richest cream, the most transparent and delicious honey, and the whitest rolls. Her cheese surpassed in taste everything made by the men in the summer high pastures, who came back in the late September autumn, bringing their cheese, which since June they had made in the chalets. In the chateau of Janod and Silver Wreath, it seemed to be always summer, and the food had the coveted June flavor all the year round. While her butter, eggs, honey, milk, and cream were the best, no one knew where she got such wonderful cheese, which excelled all. This was on the table at every meal, and all the year round, from New Year's Day to Christmas Eve, and during the holidays. Her husband was not very curious, and did not ask questions. So long as he had plenty to eat, he was satisfied, for he had a good appetite, and he loved his fairy wife very dearly, and liked to look at her often with sincere affection. While food was plenty, Janot always remembered the promise he had made and kept his good table manners. He never caused his sweet and loving wife to scold or even to frown. Because of his active life, hunger was the best sauce to sharpen appetite. Yet he always left a large part of the cheese uncut for good manners. Even when returning from a chamois hunt hungry enough, so he laughingly declared, to swallow a cow with its horns and tail, he kept at once his promise and his politeness to his sweet wife. But in one year, when midwinter came, the cold was so severe the storms so much more frequent and the avalanches so much bigger and more destructive than usual that the roads were covered so as to hide even the great landmarks out of sight. Then hunting was impossible. The wind was so tempestuous that the strongest men kept indoors. Apart from what his wife provided, Janod could bring little to the table. In such terrible weather, Janod, unable to use his rifle, could not provide meat, and even Silver Wreath could furnish only cheese. In such a case, the husband was often ravenously hungry, and an empty stomach who can bear for very long? Even when wolves and lions become tame and helpless through hunger, what strong man does not become weak? One day, after trying many hours to track a chamois and get within range of it with his rifle, Janot came back empty and very low in his mind. He was so fiercely hungry that he threw down his hat and forgot not only what the Edelweiss and Alpine Rose had taught him, but even what he had promised. When he opened the door into the larder, he saw that there was nothing there but a strip of cheese left over from the last meal. Indeed, it was hardly more than a rind. Thinking of nothing but to satisfy his gnawing hunger, he seized and bit into it. At that moment, Silver Wreath, his wife, entered the house. She saw him with the cheese in hand and cried out, "Oh, my beloved, remember your promise that you would always keep a slice of cheese. Please do wait until midnight, and at breakfast time, I promise you, you shall have all you want of the best, but now, please, please leave even a small piece over." But the hungry and tired man was too obstinate to listen. From a thinking being, he had become a ravaging beast. He gobbled up the last fragment. No sooner had he swallowed the morsel than his fairy wife cried out, "You've broken your promise and the rule of good manners in the fairy world. I cannot live with a glutton and a promise breaker. I must return to my mountains and fellow fairies." Thereupon all her clothing fell off, her cap and comb and her shoes, stockings and her pretty garments, one by one dropped on the floor. In a moment more, her former filmy blue and pink robes covered her, while from her back grew out a pair of wings, like a butterfly's, but larger and mist-like. Waving a goodbye, she flew out of the door, which opened of its own accord. Soon on the lofty mountain heights she rejoined her fairy family, while the hunter husband was left alone in misery and hunger, and worse than all, with an accusing conscience. And that's the end of the story. Oh, what kind of story is this gonna be? Well, it certainly ended in a similar matter as it started with, describing the fairy's clothing. And at the end, how all of her human clothes left her, and she was yet again clothed in magic and wonder and filmy, sparkling garments. I suppose fairies flying up on the mountains must look quite ethereal. But I did like this. I did like this story quite a lot. It was very lovely. Mm. Oh, Bard, thank you, sweetheart. Aw, thank you for resubscribing there. Has it already been 2 months? Goodness, it really feels like yesterday that we were together in my first stream, setting the kitchen on fire. And now here we are in February, mm, enjoying our lovely time together, my dear wife. After reading that story, I must wonder, are you also an ethereal fairy creature? Because you certainly are as gorgeous and precious as one, Bard. Oh, you heard me. I was getting food, I missed something. Of course she is. Well, the story was about a fairy wife, someone so amazing and so beautiful that I couldn't help but be reminded of you. Of course she is, see? LJ knows. Um, it's okay. Shh, don't worry about it. Just take it. I also recall that the fairies wore very thin and skimpy clothing. Well, LJ, that's on you. Taiga! Hello. Hello, sweetheart. I'm doing very well, thank you. I hope you are too. We are just in the middle of doing a little bit of reading here. So, if you'd like to stay, then get yourself a nice, cozy blanket. Oh, thank you for the head pat. Look at that. I'm always so happy. Oh, I love these head pats very much. Thank you for stopping by. I don't know that not feeling the cold is something that maps to Bard. Well, it's okay. If my dear Bard ever gets cold, I will simply wrap my arms around her and we'll be cozy that way. Just like I hope all of you are right now. Because we can move on to the next story. Thank you for the lurk, Taiga. Ah, have a lovely night and sweet dreams. I'm very glad to have seen you here. Good night. Our next story is called The Fairy's Palace Car. And it goes something like this. Once upon a time, the fairies that live up near the mountain tops got together, and one said to another, "Let us go traveling." "We'll go as far as Geneva," said another. "Agreed," they all shouted in chorus. "It will be like going from the North Pole to the Spice Islands. We can see all sorts of landscapes and go through many climates before we get to Geneva. So let us all begin our journey today." It was not at all strange that they should all start off at once. The fairies had no laundry to get home in time, nor new clothes to have made and fitted, nor trunks to pack, nor expressmen to bother with. There were no tickets to be bought, or reserved seats in the cars to look after, or handbags to carry, or telegrams to send, or letters to write. Neither did they fume or fret, because the taxi cabman did not arrive on the split second. They had no watches to wind up or to look at, lest they might miss the train, nor hunting cases to snap, nor sandwiches to carry, in case there were no buffet or dining cars. No, happily for them, all they had to do was jump on their ice chairs at once and be off. Now let us ask what was their palace car, in which they were to journey from the top of Mont Blanc to the Rhone River and over Lake Leman, and thence by ship to Geneva the Beautiful. It was nothing less than a glacier 20 miles long and 2 miles wide. This car, made of white snow and ice crystal, moves, as everybody knows, steadily along and down from mountain top to the valley. It does not fly as fast indeed as the Empire State Lightning Express, yet it starts on time and is sure to arrive at its terminal. It takes only about 1,000 years from the mountain's tip-top to the down below, or from Snowflake to Rhone River. When motion was begun by the fairies in the air, several hundred of them caught each a snowflake at the summit, and rode on it from the clouds to the ground, until enough had fallen from the sky to make up the party, which sat all together on a snowbank for a while, till the train was all ready. Then the slide downhill began. Every day the sun would tickle the ice mass and melt it, so it had to move on. Then, for the fairies, it was like coasting on a bobsled, and they were as merry as if they were on a toboggan. So they mightily enjoyed the fun. The fairies did not have to sit on a narrow line or hold on tight, lest they might fall off, bump against a post, or hit a tree or a rock. On the contrary, it was more like going on board a big ship or promenading on the deck of an ocean liner. They played ball and hockey and shuffleboard and danced and waltzed and had guessing and finger games and leapfrog for exercise. They sat in the cabins, which were crystal ice caverns. They played hide and seek in the crevices and blind man's buff among the ice ridges. They leaped merrily over the hammocks, and then bathed and swam in the ponds of water, which the sun melted every day toward noon. In the baths, which lasted several hours, they sported around like a lot of mermaids. In this way, they so amused themselves that they forgot or did not care to remember the passing months or years or centuries. They were traveling for fun and had no business or social engagements to attend to, or guidebooks to tell where they were going. So they were in no hurry, for the glacier only moved at the rate of half an inch an hour, or a few miles in a century. What cared they for rapid transit? There were no strikes or delay, no subway or tunnel rules, no hustler to make you step lively and shut the car door on you, or tell you to let him out or watch your step. No policeman on foot or motorcycle to overtake and arrest you for speeding. It was all pure fun. The fairies had a watcher who sat on an ice pinnacle like a man on the foretop of an ocean steamer. He it was who announced anything new in the weather or the country, or landscape through which they passed. Then, also, a lecturer came around every 10 or 20 years to explain the history and point out the wonderful things along the route or what had happened at this or that place. These wise prompters were also expected to tell what famous trees or flowers lived along the route and in the various climates. Without a telescope, they could see little moving specks looking like flies high up on the eternal snows. These were human beings who had either, like wild flowers, escaped cultivation, or perhaps had fled from prison or lunatic asylums and were bound to get up to the mountain tops, as if their keepers were after them with guns. Occasionally, an electric railroad with a snorting locomotive on a track and pinion system of cogwheels with central rail carried the passengers who could not climb or who were sane, or it might be lazy. Occasionally, in rambling through the ice holes, the fairies could discern embedded in the crystal walls black spots. Asking whether these were flies in amber, such as they had heard of, they were told that these specks were mortals, men and women, mountain climbers, who had fallen down precipices or upon the ice or slipped into crevices. Their lives ending thus, they were kept in the crystal for years until their bodies washed down the rivers. Sometimes the fairies found bits of rope and alpenstocks. They even learned to tell the difference between blondes and brunettes. Often, some of the fairies wondered how it would feel to be born as a baby and drink milk and eat candy and first crawl over the floor and then walk and grow up to be a man or a woman. They could only guess vaguely what it was to die. For that is the curious thing about fairies. They cannot die because they were never born. They do not have to grow like human babies, or big elephants, or little kangaroos, or be hatched out of eggs like chicken, or wiggle in the ponds, or swim in the water like frogs, or fishes, or whales, or porpoises. Once in a while, some fairy thought she would like to try it, just once, to live and die, just to see how it felt. But the other fairies, who did not admire her taste, only laughed at her. As a rule, these passengers on the glacier did not pay close attention to such matters. They were not much interested in mortals, but more in themselves, for they considered boys and girls and men and women to be very inferior creatures. They gave more attention to what they saw as they traveled through the country, changing climate every few thousand feet and every century or so. At first, all was snow, ice, and rocks, with no birds, shrubs, or trees, or flowers, and not even moss. Indeed, some of them grumbled and declared they would not have left home if they thought they were to see nothing more than mere human beings. But very soon, that is, after a few years, 10 or 20 perhaps, their ice chariot or train had carried them past this old scenery. Now they began to see mosses and lichens, and occasionally a condor or alpine eagle on a crag eating his dinner, perhaps a young lamb or a rabbit or a marmot or a chamois kid or something from a cow's carcass, which the big bird of prey had stolen from some butcher's slaughterhouse. This was the first sign of that uncanny thing they call life, which, in sight of mortals and other animals, makes them move about. It was a stunning novelty when the conductor called out the name of a new station. Flowers! Then they saw overhanging the rocks, or near the edges of the precipices, or in the crevices and crannies of the cliffs, what they called flowers. Yet to us folks who live in the house and nursery, these plants, so bundled up in white, hardly seemed to be flowers. They rather looked like babies, ready to be taken out to ride, for they were well swaddled in what appeared to be fur or flannel. In fact, their flowers, so called, were so woolly and cushiony and flat and low that they kept holding on so hard as if for dear life in the biting cold wind, and they looked bleak and ghostly. Some of these alpine flowers were as downy as a duckling and as hairy as a poodle. But this was to keep the plants warm, for life is warm and death is cold. Even more wonderful to most of these fairies that had lived so long up amongst the highest mountain tops and had never been lower down than 8,000 feet or so was another lovely sight, that of green meadows spangled with blooms. It was that of the summer pastures. Now they began to hear the tinkling of bells and saw many cows. They laughed uproariously as they saw that the billy goats waved their chin beards up and down and stood on their hind legs. On the roofs of the shepherds' chalets, they noticed the big stones. These were laid in rows to keep down the strips of bark or shingles when the tempests roared. While they were wondering how funny it must feel to be a boy or a girl and live in a skin with clothes on, they heard the alpine horn. While listening to its sweet echoes, some of the fairies actually began to think that perhaps, after all, mortals might have a good time, and possibly as much enjoyment as fairies do, and always have had. Most of them, however, scouted the very idea. A real epidemic of rapture broke out and went through the fairies, like measles among children, when they looked upon still greener meadows rich in grass, which were spangled with flowers, and those of the loveliest hues, deep red, scarlet, crimson, pink, violet, blue, and yellow. They saw the alpine poe, which the cows loved so dearly. When the lecturer described its kangaroo-like mothers and babies of his family of plants, the fairies laughed so loud and merrily that some of the shepherds thought that a swift horse with a strap of silver sleigh bells around its neck was galloping over the ice. Perhaps the greatest surprise of all was the sight of trees, which those fairies who had never travelled had not seen before. In one country, that is, on one level, they found only pines and firs, which rocked in the wind. Several of the fairies jumped off the train to pick up a handful of pine needles from the ground and to play cradle swinging in the tree branches. They were not afraid of being left behind by the train rushing past them, for after playing 2 or 3 years under the trees, these passengers jumped on again, and showed handfuls of their curious things that had fallen off the trees and covered the ground like a brown carpet. Then there were many exclamations of wonder among those that had kept on the train. Lower down, in another climate or country or level, they found forests of oak, birch, and maple. Yet they could not get any sweets out of this Swiss tree, for these fairies did not live in America, where the sugar maple grows. Every once in a while, the fairy that was the conductor would get out and consult the thermometer. Then, with an air of great wisdom, like an owl or a granddaddy, it was announced that tomorrow, that is, a year or two from that date, they would come into a new climate, and to such and such a level or place, so many feet above sea. Then they would see this and that sort of thing, such as houses, church spires, cheese factories, and so on. At last, having used up their old calendar through centuries and into and out of many climates, they found that their palace car train had itself greatly changed within. In one place, where the mountain sides came close together, the road narrowed. Then the rate of movement slackened, so that the ice forming the train was all squeezed up high and curled and twisted up like toothpaste pressed out of a tube. The glacier was cracked and fissured in every direction. Some of the fairies had feared lest their train should run off the track and bump into a hill, and a wreck follow, but the conductor assured them all was perfectly safe, and that no accidents ever happened on that line. One fairy tried to quote Latin, having once heard a person say it in his sermon. In attempting to say Dio volente, she got it as Dick Volente. So the knowing ones nicknamed this member of their family Dick. She did not like a boy's name, but she could not help herself. Dick warned them that they were near the end of the first part of their journey, and that the train would stop when at the level of 5,000 feet. Then the temperature would be so high that they must all be prepared to jump overboard and swim. At this bit of news, all the family laughed. They said they were glad, for already the palace cars had got so wet with the thaw inside that the ceiling dripped on them continually. The seats were slippery and fast melting away, while as for the floor, it was only a puddle most of the time. It was a case of watering stock. After all, however, the fairies did not mind it much, and they were only in fun when they pretended to grumble. At last, the train, after having made a quick passage of 1,000 years or thereabouts, arrived at its terminal. Then it gradually melted away, becoming a noisy and very muddy river. One after another, the fairies turned themselves into water and slid out into the stream, rolling about until they reached the beautiful Lake Leman, at the end of which was Geneva. Here they expected to pay a brief visit of 400 or 500 years before returning home to the mountain tops. When they arrived at the entrance of the lake and were well into the deep water, the fairies found waiting for them one of the prettiest craft that had ever floated. It was a galley of strange shape, with a high deck at the bow and the stern. There was plenty of room in the middle for the fairies to play and dance. With their pretty butterfly wings and lovely gauzy robes of every tint and hue, they looked so sweet. On the prow of the ship stood their queen, who ruled over the lowlands and the lake waters, and was captain of this fairy vessel. The smallest of the fairies were continually flitting around the queen, dropping flowers and fruits, and filling the air with perfumes. The vessel had sails of the shape called lateen, or leg of mutton. These were made of embroidered silk and cloth of gold. For even more rapid movement, several snow-white swans, swift of feet and bright of eye, were harnessed, with silver chains to the front part, called the cutwater. These drew the ship along gracefully, all the time singing in chorus the sweet songs imaginable. Accompanying this music was a large golden harp set in front of the mast, and this, whispered to by the winds, made with the swan's songs the most delicious melody all day long. Some of the fairies remembered the echo music of the alpine horn sent back by the lofty mountain peaks, which, however, lasted but a few seconds. Yet this lake melody continued from sunrise to sunset. Whenever the fairy ship touched the shore, the ground, no matter how hard and stony it had been, at once became soft with soil. Then grasses and flowers, grain farms and orchards, and trees rich in luscious fruits sprang up. Every boy and girl always on the lookout, and adults who were so fortunate as to catch a glimpse of the fairy ship, would make a wish in their hearts, which was sure to be gratified. They got what they wanted, though often in fairy time, that is, years afterwards. For years and years, the fairy ship plied up and down the lovely blue lake, stopping here and there. A moonlit night was the best time for catching a glimpse of it. Many old folks still living like to tell about the craft of good fortune, and also what they then wished for when they were so happy as to see it coming or sailing past them. But by and by, when the black smoke of steamboats poisoned the air and set the fairies sneezing and coughing, and roughened the throats of the swans so that they could not sing any more, the fairy queen gave up her pleasure trips on the lake and ordered the snow fairies back to the mountains. But first, the mountain fairies had their visit to Geneva, where they saw the pretty shops and streets, and there these fairies still live in the hearts of the children. Although nobody ever sees them nowadays, the old folks love to talk about them and tell of the lovely times they had when children. It is certain that the fairies left their blessings behind them, for to this day, on the great Genevan holiday, in the confectionery shops, on birthday greetings, and on Christmas and New Year's cards, you may see a picture of the fairy ship, with its brightly colored lateen sails, inscribed with "Good luck," or "Happy New Year," or many joyful returns of the day. Sometimes they who received those cards feel as happy as if they had seen the fairy ship. And that's the end of the story. Hmm. I quite like that one. It seemed very ethereal. Just imagining what whimsical life a mountain fairy may lead. They seem so happy and carefree, sitting on a snowflake, flittering down the mountains, riding on a glacier, playing among the pine needles and trees, and eventually turning to mermaids to swim among the waters. Ah, what a carefree life they must lead, so full of magic and joy and wonder. Hmm, yes, I did quite like that one. I hope you did as well, my darlings. We still have a couple more to go. I am going to enjoy some of my tea for a little bit. Hmm. Nothing quite hits the spot like a nice evening warm cup of tea. Hmm. I always make sure to have one with me, whether I'm streaming or not, whether it is morning or afternoon, and especially when I'm quite busy with assignments and anything that I must finish on time. Hmm. Now, my darlings, let's carry on. Ah, well, I think I'll say goodnight before you begin the next story. Of course, LJ. Thank you for being here, and I hope that you have the loveliest of rests. May your dreams be pleasant and beautiful. See you next time, indeed. Good night. And we can go on to the next story. This one is called The White Chamois, and it goes something like this. The dwarves and chamois have always been good friends. This is chiefly because they are so much like each other in being small. The short dwarves look like little men. They have beards and wear caps and clothes, but they are hardly as high as a yardstick and measure up only to the heads of quite small boys. In weight, some of them scarcely reach up to a calf. Occasionally, you find a little fellow that could be packed in a bandbox or carried in a suitcase. As for the baby dwarfs, one of them could be wrapped up in a napkin and be dropped into a man's overcoat pocket. Now, the chamois is like the dwarf in this, that he is too small to be a goat and not big enough to be a deer. He is a funny fellow to look at. His horns are only as long as from your elbow to your hand, and are turned around and backwards at the ends, so that they look like a pair of big black fish hooks. He has a yellow head with a dark band on it, and on each cheek is a strip of black, as if he were held in with bridles and bit. His coat of hair is brown, but his funny little tail is also black, and oh, how bright his eyes are. But when it comes to leaping from rock to rock, The chamois is the Johnny Jump Up among all animals, for he will skip over a chasm 15 feet wide. Then he will land on a tiny ledge of rock, so narrow that one could hardly imagine a cat could hold itself on. Putting his hind legs first, it gets a good footing and then bounds forward. These creatures are so agile that one almost expects to see the strongest of them climb up trees by hooking their horns on the branches, but they do not. They cut many capers, but not this one. The wonderful thing is that the females, as well as the males, have horns also. These chamois ladies and the little folks of the family, that is, the doe and fawn, generally live down among the lower forests, while the daddies and strong young bucks stay, most of the time, up among the high rocks and peaks. They all eat the lovely flowers, grasses, mosses, and herbs that have a hot taste and which keep them warm inside. The very old chamois with beards often live alone and off by themselves. So the dwarfs and chamois are much alike in this respect, that they are both chin choppers, in having a hair growing like a tuft under their chins, and both are able to whistle. For when a hunter comes near and the wind blows from him to them, the sentinel or watchman of the herd gives the alarm by means of a short shrill sound. Then the whole party scampers far away. Many thousands of stuffed heads of chamois, mounted with their hooked horns and bright artificial eyes, are seen on the walls of Swiss hotels and houses. After the invention of the rifle, so many chamois were killed that laws were passed which forbade any one hunter to shoot more than 100 during his lifetime. Then, when the herds of chamois went further and further away, men put telescopes on their long-range rifles, and were thus able to kill at a great distance, even a mile off. Now among these four-footed inhabitants of the high places near the sky, the white chamois is the king of the herds and the pet of the dwarfs. No hunter can kill this leader, for he is the property of the fairies. After a man has shot his 100th animal, the white chamois appears to give him warning to stop killing his fellow creatures. This king of the hook horns can leap as if it were flying over chasms. It moves through the deep snows far faster than the strongest man in the land. To the good people, the white chamois is a messenger of joy, telling of the safety of the herds, announcing also that there will be much sport for the brave hunter, and plenty of meat for the people next summer and for years to come. But for the bad hunter who breaks the law and shoots over 100, whether bucks or does or both, the white chamois is the messenger of death. Now there was a very bad man, a hunter named Ernie, who only said poo poo and fudge when an old man informed him that a white chamois had been seen near the village, as if he had braved danger in coming so near houses in order to give warning. But the man, instead of hanging up his trusty rifle on its pegs, sallied out very early one fine morning to shoot, if possible, this very creature, the white chamois, of which he had heard, but had never yet seen. It was still dark in the valley when he started, but the man knew it would be bright light by the time he should reach the peaks. And so it was, up over the rocks and across the flowery meadows that were more brilliant with many colors than any garden ever planted or parlor carpet ever woven, the hunter made his way. When he came to the edge of a deep ravine, he slung his rifle over his back and slid down. Then he climbed up to the top of a high ridge. Balancing himself on the edge of the rocks, he looked across the terrible yawning chasm. With his telescope, he swept the field of view, but instead of discerning anything brown with a black tail, he saw very clearly a white chamois. Now for a good shot, he thought. I'll show these old grannies and silly dotards down in the village what fools they are. He unslung the rifle and then, for a moment only, looked down 1,000 feet below to the jagged rocks, wondering how he could get the body of the white chamois if the bullet sped to its heart and its carcass fell down. But this was only for a second, for the bold fellow, familiar from his youth with the mountains, laughed at any and all difficulties in his path. He was just about to level his weapon and take aim when he heard a loud voice behind him shouting, "Ernie, pull your cap down over your eyes." Astonished to hear his name called out at such a place, and struck with curiosity, he turned to see who and what it was. There stood a dwarf, cap, beard, and all, with a stern look on his face. Pointing to the white chamois, he screamed, "You had warning enough. Down you go." Just then the hunter's foot, with its hob-nailed shoe, slipped upon a fragment of rock, and he fell. Over the cliff, down, down, down the cruel man tumbled. A few minutes later, the alpine condors were quarreling over his corpse. Later, the wolves picked his bones that lay long upon the bare rocks. An awful warning. After this, the chamois mothers, during the summer season, reared their kids in peace and quiet, and all was happy in the high places, where the dwarves and the chamois dwell as friends together. And that's the end of the story. That one was quite lovely as well, giving a very fair warning to anyone who may step out of line and hunt past the ordained number. He asked for it? You think so, Tech? I certainly think he had it coming. Those were some very serious rules that he broke when he shouldn't have. If the law dictates that one man must not kill 100 in his lifetime, then threatening to kill the white chamois, the most rarest of them all, is a serious offense. I think that was quite a good story. I feel like 100 is quite a lot. I suppose it is within your entire lifetime. Although, I don't really know how to imagine how many chamois a hunter would usually shoot in order to provide meat for their family. Hmm. I mean, these are certainly not things that I would ever think about, right? I mean, on the off chance that I wish to have some kind of meat, I will go down to the grocery store and maybe buy as much as one chicken in a month or three. Certainly not an entire chamois, and certainly not 100 within my lifetime. Oh, my sweethearts. I hope that you are enjoying the stories as much as I am, because I'm certain that I will miss them dearly once we conclude this book. But until that time comes, we still have two ahead of us on this lovely evening. So, get cozy, get comfy, let my voice keep you company as we carry on with story number 23. This one is called The Siren of the Rhine, and it goes something like this. The father of the fairies, who used to live along and under the river Rhine, was not able always to control his daughters after they had grown up. One of them, named Lorelei, a long time ago, used to appear above the current of the great stream at the place where the water dashes over the rocks and foams high. It was very hard in that place or near it for the sailors to steer their boats so as not to have them dashed to pieces. Only with cool heads and strong arms could the boatmen get their vessels through in safety. But if they should stop to look at the pretty maidens, or to turn their heads to listen to the lovely music which they made, then they were sure to lose their heads and have their boat go wrong and run upon the rocks. Then, of course, everyone on board was thrown into the boiling waves and drowned. The rocks are so sharp and jagged that when the boat was upset, the poor people were thrown violently against these, and even if spared by the waves, were sure to perish. The fairy, named Lorelei, paid no attention to their cries, but only laughed at them as they struggled in the water. This Lorelei, the chief of the river fairies, was never seen during the day, or during the sunlight she loved to sit among her jeweled caves and remain far below in the cool depths of the waters. During daylight hours, if any mortal tried to catch even a glimpse of her, she sought in vain. It thus happened that some people, and even boatsmen on their way down to Rotterdam, laughed at the idea of there being a Lorelei or any other fairy among the rocks. But when the moon was at its full and shone brightest, and its silvery beams seemed to turn into a fairy-like gauze woven of mist and moonbeams, the Lorelei was in her happiest mood. As soon as the sun was down and twilight fell on the earth above, she called for her maidens to dress and adorn her lovely form with jewels. They plaited part of her golden hair, braiding it up over the top of her head and around at the back. This made a pretty cap-like arrangement, while behind and down her back the other tresses fell in ripples, so that in the faint evening wind it would float out and gleam and rise and fall fitfully on the breezes, seemingly now silvery and again golden in the moon's rays. A comb of gold, studded with rare gems, added to the glory of her headdress, which in the dim light from the night skies would glisten like a cluster of stars. No ordinary man could resist such a lure, for even apart from the entertaining music, he would assuredly have the curiosity to see what this resplendent figure on the high rock could be. So, when Lorelei was arrayed in her gorgeous clothes that so heightened her beauty, this fairy would rise out of the current. Then, swimming over to the base of the loftiest rock that rose from near the river's shore, she always had her harp with her. Perching aloft on the top of the pinnacle, she would sweep the strings and make the most entertaining music. Whenever she saw a boat full of sailors coming up or going down the Rhine, she trilled her voice to particular sweetness. Then they could see her among the moonbeams, with her long golden hair streaming out on the evening breeze, or lightly lifted and rippled when the zephyrs were soft as a breath. It seemed as if her song music was loveliest when the night wind was most faintly sighing. No matter how vehemently even the most stout-headed sailors might have promised or even vowed to pay no attention to anything they heard while shooting the rapids, they were sure to drop oars and pull to listen when the melody floated through the air. Then the man who steered and had been the loudest in saying that he would clap his hand over his ears and be deaf to any strains, however sweet, was always the first to weaken. He would stand still, as if shot through with an arrow, and forget all about his duties at the rudder. Then, very quickly, the boat would strike against the rocks. In a moment more, the whole crew would be struggling, soon to sink under the waves, while the boat drifted along bottom upwards. In their last moments, the drowning men heard the fairies laughing, as if they were enjoying good sport. Now it is said that the only one who ever basked in the favor of the Lorelei was a young and very good-looking fisherman's son named Ulrich. He was his mother's darling and his father's pride, yet none of his brothers were jealous of him. Whenever he appeared at night, the Lorelei would get down from her rock throne and walk along the river's strand to welcome the handsome lad. He never, however he might seek diligently or call loudly, could find her or catch a single glimpse of her by day, but the moment he met her at night, he would be in raptures over her beauty. Sometimes she would sing for him, so that he never knew how fast the hours sped away. It was often midnight before Ulrich reached home, and once in a while it was near daybreak in the east. But always before parting from him, Lorelei would point out to her lover the place in the river where on the next morning the fish would be found most plentifully. Ulrich would then tell his father and brothers where to cast their nets, and then they always drew up a good boatload of fish. These they sold in the market at a high price, and so had nice clothes and plenty to eat. So they never asked Ulrich where he had been so long the night before, and why he reached home after the household were all in bed, and only their faithful dog Fritz kept watch at the door. His mother warned her youngest son not to go and see the Lorelei too often, but he only laughed, kissed her, and said he could stop going when he wanted to, which is the way many boys and girls talk, not knowing the power of habit, which binds like a chain. But one night the old fisherman's son did not return, and in the morning, when his mother looked into his room expecting to call and wake him, she found it empty. The bed was in perfect order, as if no one had slept in it. Putting her hand under the covers, she found no warmth. At once she gave the alarm to her husband and sons, who were then at their breakfast. Taking their faithful dog with them, they at once set out to find the lad. All day long they searched among the reeds, along the river bank, along the rocks, and even in the woods and on the hills, but no sign of son and brother was found. It was believed that the siren Lorelei, madly in love with the handsome boy, and though in the form of a pretty woman having no human heart to feel for his mother, had dragged him down into her caves under the river and deep in the earth to enjoy him as her companion forever. By and by, so many sailors having been drowned, and so large a number of merchants having lost their precious treasures in the wrecked boats, it was determined to send a band of brave men to seize the Lorelei and bind her as a prisoner. If she resisted, she was to be put to death. Thus a danger, to be dreaded more than jagged rocks or treacherous currents, would be taken away. Then the merchants in Cologne and Rotterdam would be made happy by piling up fortunes to enjoy and leave to their children. Before starting on the expedition to capture the siren, every man was taken into the cathedral, and before the altar made to cross himself on the breast and swear not to listen to the Lorelei's song. All of them wore helmets with thick padded earmuffs coming down over their ears and tied tight. All the orders of the captain were to be given by signs without his speaking a word. But what availed arrows, swords and spears, helmets and armor, and what were the strong muscles of brave men against a beautiful fairy? When the company had landed silently on the shore, without endangering their boats by going near the rocks, they suddenly found that they could not move, for the Lorelei had cast a spell over them, so that not one could lift hand or foot. All night long the captain and his soldiers stood upright and motionless, as if made of wax and in a museum, while the moonbeams were reflected from their helmets, weapons, and armor. Yet, during all these night hours, they had the power of eyesight. They saw all that was going on, and this was what they witnessed. Just as the first gleams of the upcoming sun were beginning to streak the midnight blue of the skies with light and make rosy the east, but while at the same time the moon cast a pale light on the strange scene, they discerned plainly the Lorelei. She was standing on the highest pointed rock that rose out of the Rhine. There the beautiful creature was, as if in a waiting attitude before a mirror, and about to retire to her bed for sleep. She took off all her ornaments and jewels. She unbound the bands of her shining hair, and unplaited the braids until her tresses fell in one glorious mass, like a cataract of gold. She threw away one by one her comb, her girdle, her splendid robes, and each of her pearls and gems into the foaming waters. Then she chanted a spell to draw the waters up to the very top of the rock until the wavelets rolled over her shining feet. At this moment, two white horses with long flowing manes rose up, pawing and snorting out of the flood. In golden harness they drew a chariot made of a single emerald with sapphire wheels. She sat within the vehicle, and at a word from the siren the steeds drove away with the swiftness of a lightning flash and disappeared. Gradually the river subsided to its usual low level. Minute by minute passed, and the spell over the soldiers was gradually broken. First they could move their toes, then their fingers, and after a while their arms and legs. When at last by a sign the captain gave the order to march, they faced about towards the river. Embarking on the boats, they rowed down the Rhine to Basel and Cologne and told their weird story. Never again was the Lorelei seen by man. The people who live around the old place of moonlight music say that the siren felt insulted at this invasion of her domain. In her view, what were the lives of a few sailors and the loss of one fisherman's son for a lover compared with such music as she gave so freely? So, to punish foolish men, she has never again left her shining caves under the Rhine to appear on earth. Yet, inspired by her example, the musicians have continued her sweet music, while the poets never weary of telling her story in their rhymes and stanzas. And that is the end of the story. Oh, Sam. Hello, sweetheart. I'm so happy to see you. Thank you for your subscription. You're very sweet, especially going on a 2-month streak. Look at that. How precious you are, Samuel. I hope that you are having a wonderful evening on this fine Wednesday. And I hope that you are very comfy and cozy here with us. Mhm. I'm going to give myself a nice good stretch. Mm, and sit upright because I know that is quite important. And maybe even drink some water because we've been going for almost 2 hours now. I'm always comfy and cozy with you around. Just lay on your lap, your hand in my hair, telling sweet stories. Ah, well, I am very happy to hear that, Sammy. You really are a big sweetheart. I'm glad to have you around. Hmm. Close your eyes. Enjoy my voice. We have one more story to go in this collection. And for tonight, How does it feel, my darlings, to be so close to the end? We have gone through almost an entire book. I quite like the idea of us having such a nice and pleasant time together on these Wednesdays. Hmm. I will certainly have to continue because I must say I've grown quite fond of reading to you. Hmm. I certainly have. Mm. Well, the last story has quite the title to it. This one is called The Ass That Saw the Angel, and it goes something like this. In that part of the Swiss Republic called the Grisons, there is a sharp mountain, thin and round like a horn. Because it is red, its name has always been Rothorn or Red Peak. In one of the towns nearby lived a proud man named Gruntly, who scouted the idea of there being any fairies or Santa Claus. To his view, there was no intelligence or virtue in dumb brutes. He did not believe in anything but what he could see, taste, smell, hear, or handle with his 10 fingers. This was what he called science. This old fellow, Gruntly, boasted of being a man of science. He considered that everything belonging to religion was superstition. Mule drivers, cow milkers, cheese makers, and such folk, whom he called the ignorant common people, might have faith in such things, but not he. Gruntly was rich. He had a large house, with one room full of books, but not one of these contained any poetry, or stories, or novels, or romances. He sneered at anybody who said they believed in Santa Claus, and he openly insulted people who loved to think that William Tell, their national hero, ever lived. As for the exploits of Jeanne of Arc, or of Arnold of Winkelried, he used to say that was told of them was only the same as nursery stories. Nobody loved Gruntly, for he was a hard master with his servants. Though he called himself a man of science, and sneered at the village folks when they went to church on Sunday, he did not he did nothing to help the poor people of the valley. Part of the wealth of this hard-hearted man consisted in mules, of which he had 20 or more. These were sumpters or pack animals that carried the milk, butter, cheese, and produce of the valley to be sold in the nearest large city and to bring back what was needed. Gruntly's favorite animal for the saddle was a pure-blooded white ass, which his father had given him when a boy, so that he and the dumb brute were well acquainted with each other. Large in size and imposing in appearance, this animal was named Julius Caesar, or for short, Gulick, for that was the way the great Roman conqueror's name was pronounced in the local dialect. People used to say that this donkey was the only living creature for which Gruntly cared, or had any affection, or that he even treated decently. Occasionally his master would allow this, his favorite beast, to be ridden by his overseer or chief clerk, a privilege on which this head man set great store. The sure-footed creature carried its rider over the most dangerous passes. It seemed almost a miracle, the way in which, along narrow ledges of rock, the ass moved as if on well-paved roads. Gullick seemed to measure with its eye and gauge the width necessary, even making allowance for its load, for the pack saddle, or for the knees of the rider, so that, though a dumb beast, its reputation for safety was great in all the region. Muleteers often used to scold their stubborn animals by calling them rabbit-eared fools and not worth one hoof of Gullick, the paragon among long-eared animals. Nevertheless, there were times when the donkey Gullick showed it had a mind of its own. Then it could be stubborn too, but this was what men thought, and not the animal's own opinion of itself. This usually took place when it saw that the path ahead, or the ledge of rock, over which it was expected to pass with a pack load, or a stout lady in the saddle, or a big fat fellow with both legs far out and taking up the room between the ass and the rock. Then no amount of scolding, yelling, bad temper, hard names, or even beating could move the creature. The only thing to do was to get off and unload. In fact, the ass had a very poor opinion of some human beings. He even pitied them, because they only had 2 legs, while donkeys had 4. Not once in all its long life did Gullick lose its way, slip, fall down, or have an accident. In fact, its master could go to sleep while riding home. When, as was often the case, the man was too full of strong wine to sit up straight, this was a good thing, for a sober donkey has more brains than a drunken man. Some people who believed in fairies even thought that Gullick was really a human being who, for doing something wicked in another world, had been changed by a fairy into this creature with the shaggy hide, ropey tail, and ears like a jackrabbit's. An event that seemed to furnish a fresh foundation for the common belief took place near the village of Plurs. Then the great general idea that a man had somehow got into an ass's skin was confirmed. One night, Gruntly's overseer was returning from Zurich. He reached the village of Plurs late at night. There, the wine being good and the stabling cheap, he expected to make his stay until next morning. So, stepping into the wine-room and calling for the hostler, he sat down before the table, thinking that all was right, according to the usual way of beasts and man, until morning. But when the stable-boy went outdoors, he found the line of mules was some distance up the road, and that Gullick was leading them. Running after the train, he brought the animals back to the inn, but when for a moment, being at the end of the line, he left the beasts to open the stable door, off trotted Gullick and all the donkeys after their leader. So the boy had another run and was in very bad temper. He seized the bridle of Gullick and gave such a jerk in his anger that he nearly broke the strap and pained the animal's jaw. Nevertheless, for a third time, the beast ran away. When the stable boy, out of patience, rushed into the wine room and told the overseer of the strange behavior of his donkey Gulick, the man had sense enough to follow the mule train. Well for him and his master that he did so, for when hearing a frightful noise, he looked behind him. From the top of the hill he saw a landslide from the mountain flank wipe out the whole town, leaving the houses, people, and cattle buried under a white pall of earth, rock, and snow. After this, one would suppose that the owner of Golic would fully trust the animal's wonderful instinct and unerring vision, as well as his sure-footedness. But this man, Gruntley was, as he called himself, too much of a man of science to consider such an affair as that of Golic and the landslide as anything but an accident, a coincidence, or as an example of the doctrine of averages. Wishing, however, to see the ruin wrought by the landslide, he mounted Golic, clapped his ankles against the animal's sides, and was off. Gruntley wore spurs more for show than for use, for Gullick instantly obeyed the pull of his master's bridle or the clap of his foot, and never was known to need urging. So there never had been any blood on the points of Gruntley's spurs. But this day the master was in very bad humour, because 7 of his houses which he owned in the village were now destroyed. Most of his income was thus lost, for he could no longer collect rents from the people who had been his tenants. Now, as they were jogging along and approached near the scene of yesterday's horror, the ass suddenly stopped with a jerk that threw its master forward and nearly off the saddle. There, in front of the animal in the middle of the road, stood an angel holding a naked sword. Of course, Gruntley could not see anything, for his soul had nearly shriveled up, and Gullick had never before met such a being. Yet the ass, even though it was a dumb brute, had enough sense to know that it dared not and ought not to rush up against the apparition, whatever it might be. Had it been rock, stone, ice, a mountain path, a chamois, or anything usual, the Swiss donkey would have known what to do. But before such an unusual sight, Gullick stood still. As for Gruntley, he, being a self-styled man of science, without any faith and very little imagination, could see nothing. So, when Gullick, to get out of the way, turned aside and out of the road to make its way through the field, Gruntley, getting very angry, beat the animal, and in his bad temper even laid on several blows with his whip handle. At this unusual action of his master, the ass was so surprised that he actually stopped. He turned around, gave a rebuking glance at Gruntley, and then tried to go on, but in vain. Then the man, in a worse temper than ever, not only beat the dumb brute again, but he drove his spurs into the sides of the faithful beast until little drops of blood dropped to the ground. At this, even patient Gullick lost his donkey temper, and lifting one of his hind legs, tried to kick the man's heels. This enraged Gruntley still further, and he cried out, "You stupid beast! If you want to climb up into the saddle and ride yourself, I'll jump off." Then he clutched his whip more tightly, expecting to get down and thrash the animal with all his strength. But Gullik moved on, the road narrowing down between rocks, as many bridle paths in Switzerland do. Yet no sooner had the intelligent beast entered into the shadow than again a shining angel appeared in the path in front of them, but this time in a threatening manner and waving his glittering sword. Startled at the sight, the ass again stopped, hoping its master would treat his own beast more kindly and see what was the matter. But angry men are nearly always blind, and sometimes half insane, or even wholly so. Gruntly once more drove his already bloody spurs into Gullik's side. At this, stung with pain and fearing to rush against the angel, the beast dashed sideways against the rocky wall. Maddened almost to insanity at this action, and smarting with a crushed ankle, Gruntly beat the ass with repeated and cruel blows. In spite of such inhuman treatment, and even more awed by the apparition than by the agony it was suffering, the ass lay down flat under its rider, though without hurting him. It turned its head around and looked at him, as if in stern rebuke at this treating an old friend that had ever served faithfully. Unmoved by the beseeching look in the eyes of what had been his pet since childhood, Gruntly, in the fresh fury of rage, bellowed out, "I just wish I had a sword to kill you," and he rained blow upon blow on his faithful brute. Then he jumped off the saddle, and leaving Gullik in the rocky path, walked forward a few rods. All the time he was wondering what had so disturbed and checked the brute. One look as he turned away to the brow of the mountain revealed to him a scene of frightful desolation. Rocks, gravel, ice, snow, and general debris covered what had been his 7 houses and tenants and their cattle. Looking up, he noticed that the face of the mountain, whence the mass of earth had slipped down, was greatly changed in form. Nevertheless, the landslide, for so it was, had opened a view, impossible before, of a rich pasture, where many kine were gazing. Looking intently at a cow that, having filled its stomach with grass, was about to lie down, Gruntly noticed that, before doing so, the dumb animal fell first on its front knees. "Now I see that I am a fool," he cried, as he beat upon his breast. "That cow has more religion than I, for it kneels before it lies down, while before tumbling into bed my knee has been unbent this many a year." Then, going back, he patted the neck of his faithful Gullik, washed off the bloodstains, threw his spurs away, and spoke so kindly to the ass that it rose up and actually began frisking around. Then it sidled up close to Gruntly and seemed to invite him to get on its back again. This the man did, and riding to where the village had been, organized a corps of relief to help the wounded and hungry who were left alive, and he paid for medicine out of his own purse. Then he built new and better houses for his tenants and survivors, and for those who came from other parts of the Swiss country. And when later, a devout worshipper in church and helper of his fellow men, Gruntly cared for and fed his ass Gulick in a comfortable stable until at last the beast died at a good old age. The pastor of the rebuilt village came one day and asked Gruntly to tell the story of his great change and the reason of it. Then the man made answer as follows. When it came to pass that an ass could see an angel before I, a man of science, could discern or hear him, I thought it time to believe. So I at once exchanged science so-called for faith as a little child, and my pride of knowledge for help to my fellow men. And that is the end of the storybook of Swiss fairy tales. Oh, my darlings. Oh, Bard. Thank you so much for the head pat and the hydrate and the stretch. Goodness. I will certainly uh, mm, give myself a nice big stretch. Ah, I know my back will appreciate it. mm, mm. Hydrate? Do I still have some water left? I do. Yeah, but that was certainly the last of it. Ah, my sweethearts. Well, that concludes our story reading stream for tonight. I hope that all of you were able to stay here by my side, all nice and cozy, having such a wonderful time. And I hope that you will carry on from here, either in your day or in your restful evening, or hopefully you will fall asleep, or maybe you already have. I would be most happy with that. Well, moving on from our little reading room, I think I would like to say goodnight to everyone. Thank you for the stories. Thank you for being here, Bard, and hopefully having a gentle and pleasant evening with me. Tomorrow is my rest day from streaming, but then on Friday, my darlings, on Friday, I think we will have another chill Friday evening stream with Corekeeper because there is a new update that released for Valentine's Day. So I am most curious as to how that's going to go. I might even take some time to work on our base, to maybe do a little bit of redecorating and work on some new homes for everyone who comes to visit. And maybe there's even going to be something special to collect, as is usually the case with these events, right? Yeah, Scorekeeper on Friday. Yes, I will be most delighted to play some of that. I love that game so much, honestly. And last time, together with Bard and Iroh, we killed the last of the three bosses. So now it will be time for us to venture out into the wilderness. Ooh, that will be quite spooky. The worm was vanquished. That's not how I say that word. It's vanquished. The worm was vanquished. Exactly. Vanquished. No W's. Oh, whew. But that's okay. I think I'm going to. I think I'm going to rest my eyes after this. Ooh woo woo woo. The ooh woo worm was vanquished. Oh, what on earth? That's quite silly. Well, okay, my sweethearts. I think we're just going to end it there for tonight. Perhaps some of you are softly napping. So, you know, we're not going to raid anybody. We're just going to go off into our peaceful evenings and have a most lovely time until all of us see each other again. So, my darlings, as I always say, remember that my eternal light will be with you always. Good night.